Welcome back, everyone. We're finishing up chapter 1 here of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. We left off with George and Lennie having dinner by the fire and or preparing their dinner by the fire. Going to have some beans and ketchup for dinner. And George just took the dead mouse away from Lennie, and Lennie apologizes to George. George apologizes to Lennie. They make up for the fight. And then now we left off here with the revelation of Aunt Clara, the reveal that she is dead and she's not around anymore to take care of Lennie. And then we have Lennie spoke craftily. Lennie's being clever. He spoke craftily. Tell me like you done before. Lennie does remember something. Tell me like you done before. Tell me something like you always told me all the time. Tell you what. Now who can't remember? George. About the rabbits. Ooh, we're finally going to find out about those rabbits that Lennie keeps mentioning throughout the whole chapter. And George snaps and yells at him, "You ain't put nothing over on me." And Lennie then pleads like a little kid. "Come on, George. Please, George. Tell me like you done." And George knows. You get a kick out of that, don't you? All right, I'll tell you. So while the beans are cooking, George goes on to tell the story of the rabbits. And the rabbits are really a symbol. They're a symbol for a goal, for what Lennie could get out of life. And for George, the picture is a bit more elaborate than just, one animal serving as the symbol. So he says, George's voice became deeper. He repeated his words rhythmically, as though he has said them many times before. And I'm sure he has said them many times before. Now we get this whole reason as to why George is with Lennie. Guys like us that work on ranches are the loneliest guys in the world. They got no family. They got no place. They don't belong no place. They come to a ranch, work up a stake, and then they go into town and blow their stake. And the first thing you know, they're pounding in their tail on some other ranch. They ain't got nothing to look ahead to. So for George, the whole reason he stays with Lennie is because of family. Because Lennie has become his family. And, we really can't choose our family members. And while George and Lennie are not related by blood, there is still this bond. And it is because they have each other. And nobody else in this world has each other. Because the Great Depression is such a lonely time and everybody's just trying to work for themselves, here are two guys who stay together. And so George doesn't want to lose that. Even if Lennie isn't the most ideal partner, or companion, that, he's not the best guy to work with, it's still his family and he still cares about them. They care about each other. They've been together a long time. And so that's why George won't get rid of him and let him go live off in a cave. All right, now he says, we got a future. We're not going to go to some bar room and blowing in our jack. We're not going to go rot in jail. We're actually going to go do something. And again, Lennie knows. Why? Because they each have each other. That's why. Okay, so this is the first part of the story of the rabbits, they have each other. Now, where will they be? So the dream, here comes the dream of George and Lennie. And it's kind of more sort of George's, because we have the big complete picture. They're going to get all their money together and they're going to get a little house and a couple of acres and a cow and some pigs. And as Lennie says, live off the fat of the land. Live for themselves, not anybody else. And, Lennie here, he's talking about, tell me all about how we're going to have a garden and rabbits and rain in the winter on the stove and how thick the cream is on the milk, like you can hardly cut it. And here, for once, Lennie's given us a huge complete picture. He can't remember other things, can't remember the bad thing he did back in the town of Weed, but he can certainly remember the good, and he can remember and paint a complete picture. Look at how much he says here. George keeps saying, you ain't going to say a word, you ain't going to say a word, yet look at all the words that Lennie says here. While he may have some mental disabilities and he may not be, as smart as George, he's not dumb. He's definitely not dumb. He might be selective in what he wants to remember, but he's definitely not dumb. All right, so, and George says, why don't you do it yourself? You know all of it. And he's like, no, 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 it's not the same. Ain't the same if I tell it. George has to tell it, and there's that piece of the magic. Talks about having the vegetable patch, the rabbits, when it rains in the winter, just say the hell with going to work, and we build up a fire in the stove. Now, right there, that says everything right there. This whole dream is about capturing their own self-worth. That's what they want. Their own self-worth. They just want to work for themselves and not anybody else. They don't want to be on anybody's schedule. But yet, the dream, the description of the dream gets interrupted because the beans start to catch on fire. And George says, I ain't got time for no more. Yeah, doesn't that always seem to be? We never have time to go chase our dreams. Okay. All right, so now they sit down and they chew with their beans and have a good dinner around the campfire. Okay, and George, here we go, prepping him for tomorrow. What are you going to say when the boss asks you questions? I ain't going to say a word. And you could see, he even says his face was concentrated. Lennie's trying. He's trying really hard. And, George gives him some praise. That's right. Maybe you're getting better. Now, I think this is often a misconception, like, well, no, maybe not a misconception. With therapy, we know that with therapy, people with autism and other disabilities, physical, emotional, or mental, that they can get better. But maybe it's learning more so of coping strategies or whatever. Will Lennie ever become a genius like, say, what was that story? Flowers for Algernon? Charlie? I don't think so. He's not going to be able to change who he is, but he'll be able to learn strategies to cope in the world. All right. And, here George gives him a compliment. All right. And says, you know what, maybe you can remember rabbits, especially if you remember as good as that. And again, here's kind of like that, like a parent saying, like, if you get all A's, I'll give you $20 kind of thing. We get that same kind of relationship here. All right. And Lennie choked with pride. He does know when he does a good job, just as when he knows he does a poor job on something and when he does something wrong. All right, now we get a really interesting thing here, and this is kind of like embedded foreshadowing. George is preparing Lennie for an escape plan. Can you remember this place? The ranch is just up a quarter mile that way. Which, by the way, if the ranch is only a quarter mile away, why didn't they walk that extra little bit to go sleep in a bed that night? Again, because George wanted to sleep outside and be his own boss, have a little bit of freedom before they go work on the ranch. But just keep that in mind. The ranch is relatively close by. All right, so he says to him, remember this? And Lennie's like, absolutely, I can remember this. Didn't I remember about not saying a word? So, of course you did. Well, if you get in trouble like you always done before, I want you to come right here and hide in the brush. Like you've always done before. If you always do what you've always done, aren't you always going to get what you've always gotten? So if he's gotten in trouble before all the time, can't we guess what's going to happen? Foreshadowing for later, that he's going to get in trouble again? Probably. All right, so we have him trying to use strategies here with Lennie, repetition to remember things. Okay, repeat after me and say this over 3 times, and you should be able to remember it. Sure, hide in the brush till he comes. All right, but you ain't going to get in no trouble, because if you do, won't let you tend the rabbits. Now, this is kind of an empty threat, though, and I think Lennie knows it's an empty threat, because does he have any rabbits to give him? No. So it's like, I can't give you something I don't have, and maybe Lennie realizes that a little bit, okay? But it's still that, like, kind of bribery. Well, if you don't get your A's, I ain't going to give you $20. Something of that sort. Okay, so now, prepping for bed, put your bindle by the fire. Even George has to tell Lennie simple things about taking care of himself. Like, come on, let's go put, our bindles by the fire so that we can, go to sleep. And he's got to give him directions. Don't build up the fire anymore. It's like as if Lennie doesn't know these things. Okay. And then, whoops, change the page. Sorry, do that again. All right. So they make their beds. And then Lennie calls in the darkness. And I love the ending of this chapter here because it's such a nice, sweet little scene, a little conversation. Okay? You can picture it, you know, that the fire is dying down. And you can even see the staging. They've dropped the lights on the stage or, you know, on set. And you just have that the fire glowing, and you have that little bit of cone of light around the fire. And, you know, from the darkness, Lennie calls, George, you sleep? No, what do you want? Let's have different colored rabbits, George. Sure we will, says George. Red and blue and green rabbits, Lennie. Millions of them. Furry ones, George, like I seen in the fair in Sacramento. Sure, furry ones. It's like George appeasing him. Yeah, Lennie. Yeah, we'll have lots of ones. Plenty of different colored ones. And here's Lennie again, going back to that. 'Cause I can just as well go away, George, and live in a cave. Or you can just as well go to hell, says George. Shut up now. And despite all that yelling that George has done earlier, we have full reconciliation between the two. And he really, and it is comedy here. I mean, he's not saying it to be mean, just go to hell. Shut up now. It's kind of like, all right, let's just go to bed. Can you just stop talking already and just go to sleep? I'm tired. You know, I'm sure you've had moments like that, whether it's been with siblings or doing a slumber party, but the same thing happens. And then we get return to that cinematic quality, the ending of the scene with the red light dimmed on the coals. Up the hill from the river, a coyote yammered, onomatopoeia, and a dog answered from the other side of the stream. And the sycamore leaves whispered in a little night breeze. And that whispering, by the way, is also personification. And that concludes chapter 1. So, main points of chapter 1. Steinbeck sets us up, of course, with setting, our exposition to understand where this is all taking place. We're getting context. We're also getting the history of George and Lennie's relationship. We get really important information about that. We get the setup, the foreshadowing of going on to the ranch and knowing probably that stuff's going to happen. There's going to be conflicts. Otherwise, why wouldn't George want to get there right away? He knows that things are going to go wrong, possibly. You know, he knows that, you know, trying to get Lennie to function in society can be difficult. The other thing is, what did I also talk? Oh, setting us up too with the description of Lennie's character that, you know, described as an animal, and all this animal imagery associated with Lennie too. Okay, so just keep that in mind. All this good stuff, and I hope you enjoyed listening to me ramble on. And then we'll be back for chapter 2 in the future.